Good evening. My name is Carol Wise, and I serve as an interim pastor here at the Laverne Church of the Brethren. It is my special joy to welcome you in this new season of Lent. As a congregation, we are committed to being a community of inclusion and justice, and we welcome your participation as we seek to follow the vision and witness of Jesus. I do have a few announcements that I would like to share with you. The first is a reminder that registrations and an airfare deposit of $100 is due today for anyone who is interested in participating in the intergenerational civil rights tour that is scheduled for this summer. You may either bring your deposit to the church office or submit it through the website at www.lavernecob.org. Throughout the month of February, the Service Commission is collecting winter clothes to assist individuals and families struggling to keep warm. You may bring any donations to the church office. And finally, a reminder that beginning next Sunday, we are moving to an audio-only broadcast of the Sunday morning sermon. The audio piece will remain at our regular YouTube site and will appear each Sunday at 5 o'clock, as is the current practice. And now I invite you to take a deep breath or two and to settle your mind and heart as we join together in this time of reflection and worship.
A reading from Isaiah chapter 55, verses 1 through 3a, from the New International Version. Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen, listen to me, and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest fare. Give ear and come to me. Listen, that you may live. And from Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, from the Message, the test. Next, Jesus was taken into the wild by the Spirit for the test. The devil was ready to give it. Jesus prepared for the test by fasting 40 days and 40 nights. That left him, of course, in a state of extreme hunger, which the devil took advantage of in the first test. Since you are God's son, speak the word that will turn these stones into loaves of bread. And Jesus answered by quoting Deuteronomy, "It takes more than bread to stay alive. It takes a steady stream of words from God's mouth." For the second test, the devil took him to the holy city, and he sat him on top of the temple and said, "Since you are God's son, jump." The devil goaded him by quoting Psalm 91. "He has placed you in the care of angels. They will catch you so that you don't so much as stub your toe on a stone." And Jesus countered another citation from Deuteronomy, "Don't you dare test the Lord your God." For the third test, the devil took him to the peak of a huge mountain, and he gestured expansively, pointing out all the earth's kingdoms, how glorious they all were. And then he said, "They're yours, lock, stock, and barrel. Just go down on your knees and worship me, and they're yours." Jesus' refusal was curt. "Beat it, Satan." He backed his rebuke with a third quotation from Deuteronomy. "Worship the Lord your God and only him. Serve him with absolute single-heartedness." The test was over. The devil left. And in his place, angels. Angels came and took care of Jesus' needs.
Have you ever done something that you just really, really regret doing? I'll give us some time. A man named Donald Russ Curry knows that feeling big time. In 1964, Curry was a graduate student who was interested in studying the Little Ice Age, which I learned was a period of regional cooling in North America that occurred from about 1300 to 1850 Common Era. Curry thought that he could learn about this period by studying core samples from old trees and then looking at their growth rings. So Curry traveled to California and Nevada and the Great Basin area for his research, and he eventually stumbled on what is now called the ancient bristlecone pine forest. Bristlecone pines are among the oldest life forms on Earth, some of them living over 5,000 years. I mean, to put that in context, that means that some bristlecone pines have lived through the invention of writing and witnessed the end of the Stone Age. They were rooted and thriving for several thousand years before Abraham, Moses, or Jesus were even born. I mean, it's just absolutely astounding to think about that. The natural question arises, how is it that these trees can live for so long? One reason is that they exist in very harsh conditions of dryness and extremes that force the plant to grow slowly and creates a very dense wood that becomes resistant to insects and rot and erosion. The harsh environment also means that there is a lack of other vegetation around, which makes fires less likely. Most of all, when a major root of the Bristol cone pine dies through decay or drought or harsh winds, the sector of the trunk and the living bark above that root also dies, along with any branches that are served by that sector. In time, the affected bark falls away, leaving just bare trunk wood. But what's fascinating is that even if there is just a thin, thin strip of living bark left, even just a couple of inches, that very small strip can still manage somehow to sustain a living branch and its needles, keeping that plant alive. Given their environment, it seems fitting somehow that unlike majestic redwoods, Bristol cone pines are gnarly, kind of stumpy, windblown. They're tough trees. Well, the story has it that Donald Curry, in his research, managed to get two of his borers, an instrument that enables one to take a core sample, stuck in this one tree that he was especially interested in studying. Now, these borers were expensive instruments, and Curry was very frustrated, so he went to the National Forest Service, and he got permission from them to cut down the tree in order to retrieve the borers and study the tree more fully. Now, Curry didn't know this at the time, but the tree that he cut down was named Prometheus after the Titan god of fire. It had already been studied by others and was judged to be the oldest living thing in existence, nearly 5,000 years old, and now it was destroyed. It took time, but it eventually leaked out about what Curry and the Forest Service had done. People were upset and angry and disturbed. Curry himself felt horrible and was deeply remorseful about his actions. These feelings of remorse, regret, distress, dis-ease are often linked to Lent. Lent in the Christian church calendar is a period of 40 days leading up to Easter. It commemorates the 40 days that Jesus spent fasting in the desert in order to prepare himself for his public ministry. In the desert, as Linda read, Jesus was tempted by Satan with lures of power, comfort, ego, and might. The word Lent itself comes from an Old English word that meant spring season and probably reflected the lengthening of days that occurs as spring and its new life and light arrives. For Christians, Lent is often a time of honest introspection, repentance, self-denial, and prayer as we move towards Holy Week and Easter. Many of you, I suspect, have heard of a man named Walter Brueggemann. He's a Protestant Old Testament scholar who has had a tremendous impact upon theological thinking and biblical interpretation. He's pretty old now, but he's always been an amazing speaker. Brueggemann seems most at home among the Hebrew prophets. Indeed, he kind of looks like what I imagine a Hebrew prophet might look like. He has kind of wild Bernie Sanders-like hair, a deep booming voice, a natural intensity, and a slightly crazed look in his eyes that's reflective of someone who's in touch with the holy and the radical. In his focus upon the prophets, Brueggemann has been consistent in calling the church to provide an alternative narrative and an alternative way of living that rejects the dominant forces of empire that have always been so seductive tempting, and insistent. Things like consumerism, nationalism, militarism, greed. In his book, A Way Other Than Our Own, Brueggemann turns to the poem of Isaiah that Linda read, "Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you that have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy?" Brueggemann calls this passage a wake-up call to those who were becoming too enamored with the glitter and privilege of empire and power. Reflecting upon the season of Lent, he writes, "Lent is a question, a gift, and a summons. The questions of Lent are, what are we doing? Are we working for that which does not satisfy? Are we spending for that which is not bread?" He reminds us that the gifts of Lent are free. They are the gifts in the gospel and scripture that sustain life and enable us to reject the facade and demands of empire. Finally, the summons of Lent, according to Brueggemann, is to bear new fruit, to bring forth new life, to reimagine a post-Easter world. As our church worship team thought about Lent and what might be meaningful for us as a congregation, we reflected upon the harsh environment in which we all live, with its constant seductive embrace of consumerism, violence, raw power, and greed. We thought about the disturbing rise of Christian nationalism and its comfort with white supremacy ideology. We thought about our national obsession with guns, weapons, and war. We thought about our increasing alienation from one another and the loneliness and fear that often seems so pervasive. What are we doing? How do we work for that which does indeed satisfy? How do we find food that is good so that all may live? In this conversation, we realize that as brethren, we are inheritors of a tradition that holds within it some values and impulses and practices that offer an alternative narrative, an alternative way of living to that of empire. In my mind, they are these small strips of living bark that, despite their limited size and despite the many challenges of a harsh and bitter environment, can nonetheless still manage to sustain life and meaning and health. Things like simple living, service, non-creedalism, non-resistance, humility, discipleship, the love feast, and the priesthood of all believers. During this Lenten season of introspection and pause, we're going to take some time to consider our brethren inheritance and explore some of the values and practices that have helped to define and shape us as a peculiar people who, at our best, and truth be told, we're not often at our best, are committed to practicing another way of living as we follow Jesus. To return for a moment to Donald Curry and the destruction of that ancient bristlecone pine, the outrage, distress, and self-reflection over this event eventually led to the formation of the Great Basin National Park and the preservation of that ancient bristlecone pine forest. Even more, it led to a reimagining, at least for some, of our human relationship with trees. Far from being simply an infinitely replenishable resource that could be carelessly hacked down in accordance with our own whims and needs, this experience helped to foster an understanding that trees often have a very complicated, complex, and meaningful life that needs to be honored and protected and respected. It is my prayer and longing that our Lenten journey together will help us to reimagine our relationships with God, with one another, and with all of creation. With God's help, may we discover another way of living that offers a life that satisfies and provides hope and meaning to each of us and to a hurting world. Thanks be to God.